Hello there, you're welcome along to the football show where it's gone from bad to worse for Chelsea. They were 1-0 down before news headlines. Indeed, he had scored for Leicester after 9 minutes, and just on the 40th minute now, James Maddison scored a second. Reece James might have done better. Moments before that, Chelsea thought they had a penalty, but it wasn't given. Instead, it was a free kick from just outside the area when VAR intervened. So, Leicester 2, Chelsea 0 at half-time. We'll be talking later on in the show to Suzanne Wrack. She has written a very interesting piece for The Guardian today about Phil Neville's tenure as England women's coach. Tepid was a word she used, and too much arrogance. She uses the line, Dan McDonnell, hello to you.
Hello, Joe.
She uses the line that really you wouldn't want written about you. He is, comma, overall, comma, not an unlikable person. End sentence.
It's not really like something you expect at a eulogy at a funeral, you know? Like, you know, doesn't quite sort of touch the led the tributes material, really, does it? He, you know, led the tributes describing Molloy as not an unlikable person.
No, it didn't bring a tear to the eye, I have to say. So we'll chat to Suzanne, who's written this piece, as I said, in The Guardian today. I think it's had a big reaction, and it's assessing Neville's 3 years in charge. Not all terrible, by any means. Got to a World Cup semi-final, although, as Suzanne points out in the piece, and will point out, I'm sure they had reached semi-finals numerous times before. And he did take over a side third in the world, and they're currently sixth in the world. So not a disaster, but not phenomenal either, as Phil heads towards Miami. Interesting career move, that one, Dan. What do you think? I mean, he could win 3 MLS titles in a row. I'm not sure it would land him a Premier League job.
Yeah, I guess so. It's a good question, actually, in the sense that we've actually seen high-profile coaches go to the MLS and actually they found it hard to work there. I mean, maybe if he did do that, he might, but it's just that there's no real example of someone dominating that league in such a way that it's sort of really opened doors. I do follow the MLS a bit, Joe, you know, like it's sort of a weird old league. It's sort of the American, the franchise system as such. So you have teams who are brilliant one year and they sort of, they sink like a stone, you know, and it's obviously with the designated players, it's obviously very star player based rather than a place where like a coach takes a group of players together and creates some philosophy, you know. Like Robbie Keane obviously was very successful there with LA Galaxy and did win MLS Cups, but again it was all almost, you talk about their players rather than necessarily management. Like Thierry Henry is there at the moment with Montreal Impact. You know, many people even know that. You know, it's not as if you sort of you hear people discussing Henry's graph, but that Miami one, of course, with the Beckham connection, it does have the potential to, like, they've been flirting with sort of attracting big stars, and I think there's obviously a theory, like after a protracted attempt to get that team going, that eventually, like, Miami is going to start becoming a must visit destination for retiring ex-pros. So who knows? Phil Neville could be there in a year's time, 2 years' time, managing Lionel Messi or something.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's a fair point. And I'm sure it's crossed his mind there are worse places to hang out for a couple of years than Miami. It's
definitely, yeah. I mean, you can, you know, I mean, look at Trump's going to Florida when he's out of there, you know. It's where everyone wants to spend their, you know, their leisure time, it seems. But it does. There's always a feeling there's going to be a glamour attached to that team. So maybe he's been briefed on their plans, and he knows what's coming. And who knows? This could be we could be replaying this as the door opening moment in Phil Neville's career, that he went to another level. Who knows?
There has obviously been much focus on Liverpool 0, Manchester United 0. I don't think we need to get into that again. We covered it in depth on the show last night. We haven't really touched on Wayne Rooney's retirement from playing. I mean, to a degree, he had already retired, and maybe the discussions have been had about Rooney and his playing legacy, but it's official now, he has retired. And it's interesting, you really have to go a long way to find anyone, Dan, who says Wayne Rooney fulfilled his potential. So maybe the question is, to what extent didn't he?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, it's funny, just before we started the show, like I was sort of just flicking through sort of the news of the evening, and you see Wayne Rooney as the manager, like Derby won today, talking about Jason Knight, the young Irish player, describing him as a manager's dream. And you sort of have to almost check yourself, and maybe it's just an age thing, our sort of rough age, like to imagine Wayne Rooney like using those terms, I suppose when you grow up, you perceive a manager to be something, but I don't know what you think of when you think of Wayne Rooney. But I don't think of Wayne Rooney as like a sort of a grizzled football man. Like I think there's always a bit of Wayne Rooney for me that's probably tied in a small bit with early Wayne Rooney. And that's just a personal feeling on it. But did he ever achieve what we expected early Wayne Rooney to be? And I think it's hard to say that that's the case, really. Like it's always the way. Like I think I'm touching this the last few days. There's almost like there's a cycle in every footballer with longevity, like their career, that they burst on the scene and they're amazing. They eventually have some kind of rut where they hit the ropes a small bit, and then at the end in their swan song they're a legend, and we'll take we took him for granted, we'll miss him when he's gone. And look, that's an arc that Ryan Giggs and a lot of them have like gone on a similar one. But with Rooney, it's sort of I wonder in like 20 years time, will he be mentioned in the sort of the top all time, as much as he's top of the English all time record goal scorer and Manchester United records and all this, but I find it hard to believe that he's going to be remembered like in the same way that Bobby Charlton or Dennis Law or various people will be. But maybe that's our own age bias, like in a way being overly harsh, and that his career will stand like the test of time in terms of how it's judged. Maybe because we lived through the time where he was expected to be amazing. There's a sense of deflation, but in 20 years' time, like is it just going to be, wow, look at his records?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like, if you were just to see the highlights of Rooney the way you do with Bobby Charlton, for instance, and then you see the numbers, 250 Manchester United goals alone, like forgetting all the others, 250 for United, 53 for England in 120 appearances, then you would say, well, how do you surpass that? Like, how can it get any better? And yet you do listen to John Giles, for instance, who will say Bobby Charlton's pretty much the best player he's ever seen. In terms of being on the pitch where they're played against, or in English football, certainly. I don't have his exact ranking when it comes to the likes of Messi and Maradona and Ronaldo and so on. But he has Charlton on that pedestal. And with Rooney, and you'll probably touching it with Nathan tomorrow or on Thursday potentially, he also shares that sense of unfulfilled potential. So I don't think so. I think to your point, I think there is something, unfortunately, with Rooney which has fallen short, as ridiculous as it is to say that when you look at the numbers, and to be fair, the longevity, because his lifestyle has been much criticised, and you would see him in photos smoking or doing whatever, and you would think, well, he's not going to last the test of time. But in fairness, he had an unbelievably long career, and you have to remember how young he started, and that's half his problem, isn't it? Like just how thrilling he was when he started. Like everybody who was watching football in October 2002 remembers the goal against Arsenal and David Seaman, and the commentary remember the name Wayne Rooney. And then quickly, I remember around that time Rooney was like the youngest player to score in the Premier League or broke some record, and at the same time James Milner did something similar for Leeds, and I was like, wow, my God, what's happening? But unlike Milner, who by the way is a phenomenon in his own different way, but unlike Milner, Rooney built on the spectacular start and just kept building for a while. I mean, Euro 2004, again, as we remember, it was electric. And here's where the Ronaldo thing comes in. He looked between 02 into 04 and even into the start of his United career as well, that hat-trick on his debut against Fenerbahce, he looked like he would become what Ronaldo became.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, he was thrilling, and like that injury that time, it was like there was almost Michael Owen parallels to some degree. It's like, here's another player, suffering an injury and in an appropriate time, and probably never got back to that level. Like 6 years later, Wayne Rooney, if you remember, is coming off the pitch. I think when England played Algeria in Cape Town, screaming at the camera to the fans back home, you know, like, stop booing us, stop jeering us. You know, they drew 0 on. You're thinking, like, you know, this is like what he represented 6 years on, and now it's almost like he'd come to symbolise that generation's inability to maybe deliver, that English generation's inability to deliver on their potential. Almost like didn't almost seem happy or something, you know. And
it's funny, starting to on 10, like, that's a really interesting career point to dive into, because what I just in 10 he's about 25, I make it off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
There's a whole confluence of events then against Bayern Munich. I just remember this period really well. You know, certain periods of football, you're really into it and it sticks in your head. And he did his ankle ligaments and they rushed him back. There's no question. They rushed him back that time. And his ankle just wasn't right. And I don't think it was right at the World Cup. And then, of course, and this is part of the Rooney, I was going to say the Rooney story, but it's also part of the Rooney perception. Around that time, and he knew it was coming, and I suspect it's why he appeared so unhappy. There was all sorts of tabloid revelations about his private life about to hit the shelves, and, you know, his marriage was going to be under massive scrutiny, and so all of that was swirling around him then as well, and that stuff is part of the Rooney story.
Yeah, it is. And I'm just actually thinking there, like, I haven't really thought about this, but it's like a snap test for you. And like, maybe there's people who are sort of following, you know, who are massive Manchester United fans out there who will put me wrong on this. But if I was to say to you, like, you know, pick, when you think of Wayne Rooney, right, like, what are the 3-4 moments that stand out? You know, what are the ones? So I'm thinking off the top of my head, you know, the volley against Man City, or the stunning goal against Man City. I'm thinking of the one where he's talking to the referee and he scores that volley against Newcastle, the Everton one when he was a kid. And I'm kind of wondering, I guess what I'm saying is, like, how many of those are from the last 6-7 years of his career? Like, how many of them come after he was 25 or 26? You know, and maybe people will correct me on that, and there's iconic ones that I'm forgetting. But it did seem that, like, from that point onwards, like, the thing about Rooney was that someone produced a stat that, like, he was never top scorer in a league-winning season. It was almost like, you know, like, I remember he scored in the Champions League final against Barcelona, but they lost. You know, he actually, and I think that at the time he scored the goal in the game, it was like, I think to get it back to 1-1, you're thinking, yes, this is Rooney, like, he's stepping up, he delivered, but he never necessarily, like, you know, has delivered that absolute picture book front of the scrapbook, you know, this won them the trophy, like, absolute defining moment, you know, and like, he was part of, like, he won everything. So I mean, that's obviously a very harsh read, but I guess what I'm saying is that so much of it is probably centered towards the early part of his career, and you almost forget, like, the, you know, well, I don't think it's forgotten. I think Sam Wallace had a good piece the other day. I think it was used in our paper, like, that, you know, his relationship with Ferguson obviously was bad, you know, for the last couple of years. And I even stumbled across some old quotes earlier, like during the time of David Moyes, that very brief time, like, Rooney did manage to get himself a 5.5-year deal on very, very big money, which became a problem afterwards when he wasn't necessarily proving to be worth it. And there's a Moyes quote where he actually spoke about going over to like, this is like, I mean, just all the Moyes quotes now haven't aged well, but it's sort of Moyes saying that he said to Rooney he thought he'd gone a little bit soft. You know, that was a phrase that he'd used. And you're sort of thinking now, well, I mean, I'm not sure if he was that soft. He's just after getting a 5.5-year deal for 300 grand a week. You know, he's obviously got something about him. But there's a certain, like, the deep sense of probably unfulfillment all comes with the fact that the second half of his Manchester United stay was so deprived of any moment that really stands out as special. Unless you're going to tell me I've forgotten one, but I can't really think of them. You know? No,
I think your memory of it pretty much tallies with the stats I've been able to dig up here while you were talking. So that year, that 2010 World Cup, you know, that really could have been something for him, because he was the Players' Player of the Year for 2010, and he was the Football Writers Association Footballer of the Year 2010, and he was 5th in the voting for the 2011 Ballon d'Or, which effectively was the previous year. So right around then, and that ankle injury really was not good, and then the tabloid stuff and the way his life was had a major impact. But that 2010 season, he played, let me see here, and I get it for you. Yeah, he played 32 Premier League matches, scored 26 goals. You know, that's serious going, 26 and 32. And in the Champions League, he scored 5 goals in 7 games. Again, that's a serious amount. And really, where it goes off a cliff is his last great year is 2012. 34 Premier League games, 27 goals. Again, 27 goals in 34 Premier League games. And again in the Champions League, his 2 best years in the Champions League, 7 games and 5 goals. So the following year in the Premier League, he goes from 27 Premier League goals down to 12. And then the rest of his career is, so it's 12, 17's not bad in 2014, 17 goals, but then it's like 12 goals, 8 goals in his last year. It's 5 goals. So it really does nosedive after 2011-12 territory. And the last great goal that you mentioned was the Man City overhead, which was in 2011. So, you know, again, not to further extend the Ronaldo analogy, but right around the time Ronaldo goes from good to exceptional to all-time great is around the same time that Rooney nosedives from 5th in the Ballon d'Or to just, you know, not bad by any means, but almost shadow of himself territory, which probably exacerbates that sense that as Ronaldo started to touch something, you know, all-time, Rooney was really nosediving. So yeah, no, your memory of it is pretty much bang on with the stats as well.
Yeah, like it is striking though that David Myler was on last Saturday and sort of raved about Rooney and I think it's one of these things that again you're judged by the highest standards. So let's say I don't know how many times he played against them, but do you ever notice sometimes with like I noticed it here, but also with the PFA sort of awards in England and the teams and stuff, that you might have someone like Pogba who's derided, yet he'll still get loads of votes in those things from other players because while there's an outside perception that they're not delivering on their ability, for that player who plays against them once or twice in a season, it's like anyone at any level, you walk on the pitch with someone and you think, yeah, he's amazing. And yes, you're not thinking, well, he's amazing, but he's not as good as he used to be because this is the only time you've encountered him, and like Myler was even speaking a little bit about his pace even, which wouldn't be something that wouldn't necessarily spring to mind for me. And it's funny, like you mentioned John Giles, who always was such a big believer, a big fan. He always believed, didn't he, that Rooney could go and play deep in midfield. He always had this sort of feeling that he might, which I think he did eventually in the MLS to some degree. But so I think like people who shared a pitch with him like just once or a couple of times didn't judge things very harshly, like in the way the commentators from the outside do.
Yeah.
That he just had that greatness that was apparent to them. But as you say, you put him alongside Ronaldo, which is the highest, but you're talking about. We always say, when will we ever get another Messi and Ronaldo? Like that's definitely going to stand the test of time. It's unfortunate that he's compared to them. It's a compliment that he is, but yeah, you're right. Like it doesn't match up. I mean, Ronaldo, is still playing a big part in, winning Euro 2016 and Champions Leagues and other tournaments. By the time where Rooney just couldn't do it anymore. But again, it comes back to like, did he look after himself enough? I mean, I remember like didn't Darren Gibson left Manchester United basically under a cloud quite suddenly, and part of it was he'd been, I think, out with Wayne Rooney around that time, and there was a story where there was a couple of them out, and obviously Rooney couldn't be shown the door because he was that important. But even just the fact that he was involved in that, it probably planted a seed about maybe his mentality, which he probably never quite shook off. And yet now, but isn't it? I think I'm very interested by his managerial career because sometimes actually it's you'll find that the lads who maybe weren't like flawless pros, who made some mistakes, actually end up becoming good managers because they have a real understanding of players who occasionally make those mistakes. And you've heard great things in recent years about Rooney's influence at Derby as a player when he came back, that he really does have an amazing life experience, even a more rounded life experience than others who were consistent all the way. And you kind of wonder how he'll apply that to his managerial career. It could be very interesting.
Yeah. And like there's so many mitigating factors when you're being fair to Rooney. Like on the pace point, and it's never talked about Rooney, but if you think back to that 08 season, that Tevez-Ronaldo-Rooney partnership for those 2 years, how many breakaway goals did Rooney more than keep pace with Ronaldo running the length of the field? And maybe it's his body shape, but you don't appreciate how fast he is. Yeah, like lightning quick. And you can imagine trying to keep pace with him as a defender or as a David Myler. And the other thing to remember as well, for years of Rooney's peak, Ferguson played him at times out of position. Often, in some of his real peak years, he was shunted, particularly in the Champions League, out to the left-hand side. Not like left of a front three, but pretty much like a 4-5-1. And in that instance, he was just a victim of his brilliant, brilliant team ethic and attitude. Ronaldo couldn't be trusted to do that job. Maybe Ronaldo, the more natural winger, was like put in the centre, and Rooney, sorry, you're just going to have to trek up and down the left wing. And like Rooney did it. And we underestimate that kind of greatness as well, which if you're, a pro's pro, I suspect is absolutely invaluable. Like it's to his unbelievable credit that he was willing to do that for the team.
Yeah.
Gary Neville.
It happened with England as well.
Yeah.
Remember the World Cup in 2014? You were there. I can't remember if you were at any England games, but he was actually shunted out to the wing a bit at times. But in some respects, you could spin that as being damning too.
Yeah,
because
he wasn't the Ronaldo of that team.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't building a team around him, and it was more a case of maybe they were accommodating him because they had to, rather than you start with him and you build the blocks around him.
Yeah, 14 is actually a good point. If you're picking that up from 2010, which is a kind of what could have been maybe. By 14, it's kind of over. It's gone. He's on the way down.
Yet still breaking some records at that stage and being acclaimed as a legend, which he will be remembered as ultimately. It's just the grades of it.
Yeah. Gary Neville said on Monday Night Football that he just understandably wasn't getting into comparing Rooney to Bobby Charlton or Stanley Matthews or people he hasn't seen play, but he said he's the best centre forward certainly that he had played with at Manchester United. Cantona, Hughes, York Cole, Tevez, Berbatov. He had Rooney right there beside Ronaldo in his kind of all-time team and just raved about him. So like I think you're right when you say our assessment is harsh. It's real like sitting on the sidelines, journalists kind of being too smart for their own good, taking this broad stroke.
Why journalists are so popular when people rate their professions.
And almost just looking for an impossible standard. But hopefully we've kind of explained where we're coming from. In the main, it's because he was so promising and so electric for more than just a year, more than just 2 years. Like there was a trajectory there for 4 or 5 years where this thing was like, my God, when Rooney's 27, and that didn't happen. And look, I it's funny, my brain come quite quickly here. I was about to say maybe that's what happens when you play when you're 16, but then Ronaldo played when he was 16.
But he's a sort of, I suppose, a freakish example.
He is a freakish example.
Isn't it interesting though with someone like Mbappe? Like we'll see how will we speak about him when he's 27, 28, because he looked ready to take over the world. In Russia, and I mean he's won the World Cup. He's climbed the highest peak, I guess. But I mean, I don't know. Is it just me? Like, or we don't talk of him in the same breath now. So like it just happens that way for a lot of players too. So I'm sure he'll be fine. Like, but it's more in some respects the remarkable ability of Ronaldo and Messi to stay at that level all the way through.
No, they're freakish.
Just unbelievable.
They're freakish. And to be fair as well, one last point and we'll move on because I know there's a lot of other stories we wanted to touch on. It is also grossly unfair to look at his unbelievable feats as a youngster. And when I say youngster, I'm talking like up to the age of 25, 26, to be fair, even, a little bit 27, and almost hold them against him as opposed to saying, look how good he was, and Michael Owen gets this too. There's a sense of, and Owen's a more extreme case. Instead of looking at how great Owen was for a couple of years, it's like, well, didn't quite happen for Michael Owen. And like Rooney did all those things we're talking about up until he was 25, 26. Like he did them. He scored in Champions League final in 2011 as well against Barcelona.
Which is
So they happened. They weren't just like, oh well, this is the dress rehearsal, and we're about to see what he really does when he's 29. That and so that can creep into the conversation.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, I think you spoke to Owen. I think was it before, and other places where Owen can, can really articulate his experience now. And I'm just thinking, like it's not long. I mean, like Rooney has done those brilliant columns in the Sunday Times. Really sort of. Again, like tackling the perception that probably existed of him when he was younger because of his background, let's be blunt, and mistakes that he made, very public mistakes that he made. But actually, like it suggests that like he was accumulating knowledge along the way, and he's able, and that's why, as I said, I'm like, you'd be very interested to hear him when enough water is passed under the bridge, how he reflects on it, and maybe when he works with a couple of prodigious talents himself, how he deals with them. And that's definitely, you definitely feel that there's more in his story to come.
Yeah. Good texting by Paul, maybe to finish on. Rooney delivered plenty of otherworldly moments, lads. Not everyone lives that white picket fence life and delivers on every ounce of promise. The boy done good by any metric, bar the very, very highest measurements. I think that's
very fair, yeah.
Good way of summing it up, Paul, to be honest. So we've not long, actually. We kind of blathered on there too long, I'm afraid. We've not long before we have to take an ad break and chat Phil Neville. What's going on elsewhere that you want to touch on today? A few Irish players on the move, a few bits and bobs.
Yeah. It's that sort of January window time where obviously there's a bit of that going on.
Has anyone resigned? I feel I should leave with that. Anyone from Stephen Kenny's? Okay, good.
No. I think we've hit our quota for that now, Joe. I think we've hit our quota. I think we're maybe waiting for appointments, but I'm not sure if we're going to have them sort of this week. You know what I mean? But we'll see what happens with that. I think we'll see where we go with that. Obviously, sort of maybe Mark Kennedy's possibly in the mix now more than people might have thought previously. If the Lee Carsley thing doesn't seem to be probably not going to happen, seems to be the vibe. So you're talking about John O'Shea and his well sort of flagged multiple commitments that he has, but maybe Kennedy might come into it. He's a good relationship with Keith Andrews, who's there and he's available, so he might be one. He's coached at Man City and Ipswich and Wolves briefly, and briefly managed Macclesfield. So we'll see. Talk about Wayne Rooney. He's obviously managing in the Championship. Conor Heron's going there now, which is probably the one that struck me today. He's leaving Aston Villa on loan to go to Swansea, which, listen, on the face of it, is disappointing that he's dropping down a division, because he actually finished last season when Villa were staying up, like, as a Premier League starter, and you thought, well, he's shown he can play there, but he just hasn't been able to. He's got pushed out of the Villa side this year. But Swansea are second, and they are like very valid promotion contenders. So maybe it might just be a step back to step forward. But we are in that sort of time now where even as much as the pandemic has probably changed aspects of the transfer market and stuff, it still is a month where a lot of players will make these short-term moves, and we'll see where they all pan out. And that's, even from an Irish perspective, I don't think he played since November, Conor Heron. So he couldn't credibly play in March with that preparation, whereas now he's going to go and play somewhere. Okay,
good on him. I think that's probably the right thing to do. Minutes at Championship is far better than bench in the Premier League.
I think so, yeah. And he is 29, and Conor Heron, I wouldn't pretend to know him at all. I've interviewed him quite a few times. Like, he's sort of but he always seemed quite restless anytime he's sort of challenged or has been dropped, or he has that sort of intensity about him. And he does strike me as the kind of fella who would not just, as you mentioned, he wouldn't, like, I'm sure he's on a very good contract. I'm sure he could sit there, because he's been on the bench for him. It's not like he's been with the bomb squad. Like, I'm sure if he wanted to, he could sit there and pick up his money, but I don't think he has that personality in him, really. And clearly, like, he's going to go and embrace the challenge of helping a club get promoted. And as you say, it's probably better for Ireland, because some of the other players haven't played a huge amount in that position, so he for his own sake, he probably needs to play.
Okay. Andy Reid, I see, has left his role as Ireland under-18s coach. He's going to be the Nottingham Forest. Obviously, he was a player there. Nottingham Forest under-23 coach as well. No discord here. This was just a move. No.
Like, he was already part-time at Forest, and he's just been given a sort of a full-time position. But Andy Reid has always lived in Nottingham. I think he stayed there. He stayed in the general area. Yeah. It was obviously his first club that he moved to when he went to England. So that under-18 role with the FAI was more. The under-18 isn't part of they don't play European qualifiers. It's the 17s and the 19s. So it's a sort of an intermediate sort of, it's a bridging level grade. So it's not something we need to, but someone might find crisis in it, but there isn't one.
Okay. Anything else you want to mention before we go to the ad break? There's no pressure, by the way.
No. I see I see you talk about young stars. I see Conor Masterson, who we would have been pretty excited by. Yeah. He's dropped down another level from QPR to Swindon. like, it just goes to show, like, it's really, really hard to establish yourself in the top 2 divisions. And I talk about grades, like Wayne Rooney is someone spent his entire life like in the elite level, and even someone like Jason Knight, who's starting off, to establish yourself in the championship at 19 is amazing by any standard compared to the competition you face. But Conor Masterton went to Liverpool at 13 for big money, but he's going into League One now. But that's closer to the reality of the game. But that doesn't mean he can't come back either.
Yeah.
Definitely not.
Yeah. Dan, stay with us. We're talking Phil Neville and his tenure as England boss next. 61 minutes gone at the King Power Stadium. Still Leicester City 2, Chelsea 0.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power. New normal, same old football. Paddy Power. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.